Chapter 7. Forensic expert Brenda Wyatt was a New Yorker, born and bred. Until quite recently, she had lived with her father, the owner of a watch repair business, who had viewed the arrival of Quartz movements with the same consternation that cavalry generals had felt on the coming of the machine gun. The old man had now retired to Florida to spend his time following up his interest in antique weapons and attempting to trace his ancestry back to the 16th century English poet whose name he shared. Brenda's apartment had only just reached a state of order, and when the call came through to her, late, that there had been a murder at Madison Square Garden, she had trouble in finding what she called her working clothes. Once she was suitably dressed, she took a cab across town, but her mood was one of irritation. While the guys at the precinct appreciated her looks, they tended to be a little offhand about her position as their forensic expert, and she found her attractiveness more of a hindrance than a benefit. She was determined to educate them into a more professional regard for her services. She paid the cabbie and went down the ramp to the underground garage below the gardens. At the bottom, she stopped and peered around her with some astonishment. The place looked as though it had been hit by a bomb, with wrecked cars all around. Strangely, they were all neatly parked. There were people in uniform and civilian clothes milling around like bees in a hive. A young cop she hadn't seen before stepped forward as if to prevent her from going further, but her glare told him more than any ID would have done, and he paused and pretended interest in a wayward hubcap at his feet. Lieutenant Frank Moran was standing near a pillar, rubbing his stomach. His ulcer is bothering him again, thought Brenda. Once an ulcer caught hold of a cop, it was difficult to tear it loose. The life was one of irregular meals and fast foods. She knew he tried to stick to a diet, but the job was against him. Although she felt sorry for him, she knew she had to bawl him out, or the same thing would happen next time. She crossed the floor to him. "Damn it, Frank! Forensics is supposed to be notified at the same time as homicide." As she spoke, she looked down at the corpse, and despite her training and subsequent experience, her stomach did a flip-flop. A man without a head doesn't look like a man at all. He looks like something ready for the butcher's cleaver. Brenda said, "Holy shit," and then could have bitten off her tongue. She hated reacting like a layperson in front of her colleagues. She need not have worried. Frank had the same sort of expression that she knew she was wearing. He rammed his hands into his pockets. "Yeah, this one came unassembled." "Did you make an arrest?" "No. We're questioning some guy named Nash." Brenda nodded and then gestured at the wreckage around them. What happened? The street warriors decide to have a party? Frank looked up and stared at the debris. "That? God knows. Looks like a hurricane's hit it, doesn't it? Maybe some street gang? Yeah, I don't know. This guy Nash isn't some young punk with a switchblade. He's an antique dealer down on Hudson Street." Brenda nodded at the corpse again. It was becoming less obscene by the minute. Familiarity breeds contempt. "That was no switchblade. The neck's been sliced clean through." Frank turned away to talk to an officer nearby, and Brenda felt the presence of someone else at her elbow. It was Bedso. They had almost had a thing going a short while back, but Walter was a clinger, and she just got out from under in time. A casual relationship would have been fine, but she realized early enough that Walter took everything too seriously. Once he had got his foot in the door, she would have had to chop it off to get some privacy. She didn't need that kind of problem at this point in her life. Walter Bedso looked at her with sad eyes. "Hello, Brenda." She did not look at him, but put on her iceberg face just the same. She did not want to encourage him. "Hello." "You look pretty, Brenda." She ignored this and walked towards Frank Moran, who was talking to one of the arresting officers, Garfield. Garfield was smirking. "What do you think's the cause of death, Lieutenant, huh?" He laughed into Brenda's face as she came up to them. Moran made a face. "Christ, you're a barrel of laughs, Garfield." Haggerty, his partner, was hustling someone out of the garage. As usual, there were too many people with no answers around. A man was standing by the remains of his car, wailing, "Hey, cop! How am I going to explain this to my wife, man?" Walter Bedso had come up alongside her again, as if he were attached to her by a line. He called to one of the uniformed policemen. "Hey, Walker, get me a cherry cheese sandwich to go, please." He turned to Brenda. "Have you eaten?" Her stomach did another circuit at the thought. "Not now, Walt. I don't want to think about it right at this moment. Do you mind?" "No, sure. I just thought..." His sentence drifted off the end, and he looked uncomfortable. Poor Walter. She pulled herself up short. Not that way. If she started feeling sorry for him, she might end up doing something about it. Moran was speaking to Garfield again. Hey, what time did they say? What time did he buy it?" "About 10:30? Brenda said, "Whatever made the cut was razor sharp." They were interrupted by some confusion in another part of the garage. A cop was saying, "Get out! I told you to get out!" The vultures. They all wanted to feast their eyes on the carcass so they could say, "My God, look at that. Makes you want to throw up, doesn't it?" Bedso leaned forward, touching Brenda's arm, and she moved out of reach. He then turned to Moran. "Frank, about 2 days ago the teletype told of a guy that was killed just like this, over in Jersey." Moran muttered, "Yeah, but I figured what the hell, that's Jersey." He began rubbing his stomach again. Brenda walked away, just as Moran was saying sharply, "Garfield, cover that head!" She knelt down by the corpse again to study the wound now that her stomach had settled and she was able to view it with a professional eye. When she looked up, a gleam attracted her attention. There was something under one of the cars a few yards away. A piece of bumper? It looked too slim for that. She pulled on a plastic glove that she had taken from her bag and walked over to the spot. She reached underneath the car and pulled the object out. "Hey, babe," she said to herself. "Look at you." The weapon brought out in her the detached, interested observer of a work of art. She had inherited from her father a technical interest in ancient weapons, especially bladed weapons, and she could appreciate the craftsmanship that had gone into the fashioning of the sword she held in her hand. It had a beauty that almost managed to obliterate its deadly purpose in her eyes. The blade glistened, having still some of the watchmaker's oil smeared on the steel. There didn't appear to be any blood on it, which was puzzling. She ran her gloved fingers over the finely wrought hilt. "What the hell have you got?" It was Moran. "A Toledo Salamanca," she said, turning it over under the light. "A what?" "A sword, Frank. A very rare sword." "That's got to be..." The light caught the hilt as he looked at it, and he whistled. "Is it worth much?" "Only about $1,000,000. Any antique dealer on Hudson Street could tell you that." She looked at his face, and from his expression deduced that he had his motive for the murder at last. She wasn't sure. Walt had mentioned a similar beheading over in Jersey. Surely this guy didn't make a habit of murdering sword sellers. It didn't add up. However, she decided to refrain from comment. It might have spoiled Frank's evening, and he had stopped rubbing his stomach.